Ford Motor Company, an icon of American strength, built on the grit of factory workers and the faith of everyday families, just made a move that has the entire nation talking. Some call it a ruthless betrayal of the American workforce. Others say it's a necessary step to stay competitive in a merciless global market. Whatever your stance, one fact is undeniable. This decision has triggered a political, economic, and cultural firestorm. And it all started with a single corporate announcement about electric vehicle production. For years, Ford has symbolized more than just cars or trucks. It's been woven into the very fabric of American identity. Henry Ford's innovations changed how factories operate, how wages are paid, and how the average person experiences modern life. Generations have grown up with images of F-Series trucks rumbling down country roads or Mustangs racing along open highways, emblems of American freedom. Now, that storied legacy is facing its greatest test yet, a wave of public fury, calls for boycotts, and a deeper reckoning about whether patriotism can survive in a global marketplace. But what exactly did Ford do? How did it bring down the wrath of politicians, unleash market chaos, and sow resentment among workers who have devoted their lives to building its cars? In this video, we'll follow the chain reaction set off by Ford's announcement, exploring everything from Wall Street panic to backroom political deals to union threats of strikes. By the end, you might wonder whether the so-called American dream itself is in jeopardy. So let's dive in and uncover the startling details behind this unfolding crisis, before it transforms the entire auto industry as we know it. It all began with a routine press release. Ford stated that in order to remain globally competitive, it would be shifting a significant portion of its electric vehicle production overseas. On paper, the statement was bland, full of corporate buzzwords like strategic realignment and cost efficiency. But as soon as journalists dug deeper, the real story emerged. Thousands of jobs, once promised to American workers, now appeared destined for foreign plants. The factories, long-standing pillars in Midwestern towns, faced potential downsizing, if not outright closure. Within hours, the news had rocketed across every major media outlet. Ford was once again the talk of the town, but for all the wrong reasons. Instead of headlines about innovative EV designs or advanced battery technologies, the company found itself at the center of debate over national loyalty and broken promises. Commentators railed against the abrupt nature of the decision, while politicians jockeyed for airtime to position themselves as defenders of the American worker. The speed of public outrage caught nearly everyone off guard, including Ford executives themselves. They'd likely anticipated questions, maybe some cautious skepticism. But what they got was an inferno of accusation and resentment. Community leaders from Detroit to Louisville blasted the company, reminding Ford of every tax break, every local bond issuance, and every labor concession that had been offered to keep factories open. That same day, rumors about employee cutbacks and even entire plant shutdowns started swirling like wildfire. Ford tried to temper the growing panic by insisting that the overseas shift was only partial and that the company remained committed to a significant domestic footprint. However, in an age of social media, where trust is fragile and cynicism is widespread, those words rang hollow. People heard overseas and fixated on the fear that an economic pillar was crumbling in real time. But as alarming as this seemed on the surface, there was more happening behind the scenes. A perfect storm of economic pressures, political ambitions, and shifting consumer preferences. The seeds of this meltdown had been planted long before. Ford's public stance was that it needed to act quickly to adapt to a rapidly changing EV market. Yet the speed and depth of the backlash suggested that the automaker had grossly underestimated the power of national identity in shaping consumer sentiment, and the cracks appearing in that sentiment were about to widen.
To understand why people reacted so fiercely, we need to look at Ford's role in America's cultural psyche. For more than a century, Ford wasn't just another car company. It was a mythic brand that promised freedom on four wheels, a paycheck for the working class, and a sense of collective achievement. Henry Ford's assembly line revolutionized industry, bringing affordable vehicles to the masses and forging the template for 20th century middle-class prosperity. World War II further cemented Ford's patriotic image. Ford plants churned out the vehicles and equipment that helped propel the Allied war effort. By the post-war era, the company had become a cornerstone of the American way. Its factories dotted the landscape, each one feeding local economies and providing stable employment in communities that often had few other large-scale industries. People who had never stepped foot inside a Ford plant still felt a sense of attachment to the brand because it symbolized the triumph of American innovation. Add to that the iconic cars themselves, the Mustang, the F-Series trucks, the Thunderbird, models that didn't just transport people but lived in songs, movies, and national folklore. Owning a Ford became a point of pride. A statement that you believed in buying American, supporting U.S. workers, and sustaining the nation's industrial backbone. So when the company announced a move that contradicted this deeply embedded heritage, it wasn't just a business decision, it felt like a gut punch to everyone who had placed their faith in Ford's all-American promise. People who had grown up hearing their parents say, "We only buy American cars in this house," suddenly felt betrayed. Yet many observers caution that this reaction, while understandable, neglects the stark economic realities that automakers face today. The global competition is intense, battery costs are volatile, and the industry is undergoing a seismic shift to electric power. In short, Ford is not operating in the Henry Ford era. It's fighting for survival in a cutthroat market. Nonetheless, the disconnect between corporate necessity and public sentiment had never been so painfully apparent. The tension was about to explode onto the national stage, fueled by the one person guaranteed to amplify outrage, Donald Trump. Donald Trump wasted no time. Within a day of Ford's announcement, he was on stage at a rally in the Rust Belt, unleashing a verbal broadside that seized headlines nationwide. For Trump, this move was more than corporate cost-cutting. It was a blatant affront to the American worker. "They're shipping your jobs overseas," he declared, jabbing the air. Ford built its empire on the backs of hardworking Americans, and now they're turning their backs on you. The audience roared in agreement. The sense of betrayal wasn't new. Trump had campaigned on these themes for years, promising to punish companies that outsourced production. In some ways, Ford had served up a perfect example of what he had long been condemning: a massive corporation that had reaped the benefits of U.S. markets and labor, but then chose to chase cheaper costs elsewhere. That narrative was tailor-made for Trump's brand of populism. Trump didn't just talk, he strategized. Almost immediately, conservative media outlets lit up with calls to boycott Ford vehicles. Hashtags like #FordSellsOut started trending. Editorials slammed the company for abandoning the very people who'd remained loyal through recession after recession. Meanwhile, behind closed doors in Washington, Trump's allies began drafting punitive legislation aimed at automakers that shift EV production abroad. Proposals ranged from hefty tariffs on vehicles built overseas to revoking federal subsidies for those same vehicles. The message was clear. If Ford wanted to outsource, it would pay a steep political price. Ford, in turn, scrambled to articulate its position in a way that might calm the storm. It emphasized that certain high-profile EV lines would still be produced in the United States, and it insisted that it remained committed to sustaining American jobs. But public confidence had been shaken. And once that happens, it's extraordinarily difficult to regain trust, especially when Trump's daily onslaught gave no breathing room. Some skeptics wondered whether Trump's fury was more about political theater than genuine worker advocacy. After all, the complexities of modern automotive supply chains rarely lend themselves to simplistic keep-it-here solutions. But for the thousands of employees and supportive communities at risk, political theatrics were the least of their worries. They wanted concrete answers. Would their jobs remain, or would they vanish in the new EV age? While Trump fanned the flames of public anger, another crisis was unfolding in the financial realm. Investors are not typically swayed by political grandstanding unless it threatens to disrupt the economic fundamentals. And that was exactly the fear. If the U.S. government slapped EU tariffs on Ford's overseas-made EVs, if it yanked away tax credits for buyers, or if consumer boycotts gained traction, Ford's bottom line could take a massive hit. No surprise, then, that the company's stock price dove sharply in the days following the announcement. Yet the panic didn't stop with Ford. The entire auto sector felt the tremors. Other U.S. automakers, worried that they might be next in the political firing line, saw their stocks dip as well. Meanwhile, analysts debated whether Ford's move was a necessary pivot or a disastrous miscalculation. Some praised the attempt to reduce production costs in a perilous EV market. Others cautioned that Ford had horribly misjudged the public relations fallout of offshoring. The broader market meltdown also caused a wave of uncertainty in supplier networks, from battery manufacturers to logistics companies that shuttle parts to assembly plants. If Ford's shift overseas was just the start of a larger wave of industrial offshoring, would the entire domestic supply ecosystem be upended? Some suppliers began exploring their own international moves, hoping to stay close to the automakers that are increasingly basing key operations abroad. At the consumer level, the market volatility translated into anxiety about vehicle pricing. Would tariffs cause EV prices to skyrocket? Would the end of certain tax credits make the next wave of EVs unaffordable to the typical buyer? And how would that reshape the auto industry's trajectory, especially if the U.S. government pushed for more Made in America mandates? The sum of these fears made the stock market environment especially chaotic. For critics of globalization, it vindicated their long-standing argument that multinational companies can destabilize local economies with a single decision. For champions of free trade, it highlighted the potential pitfalls of letting politics overshadow market considerations. And while investors struggled to navigate the uncertainty, another more personal battle was brewing on the ground, in the hearts and minds of rank-and-file workers. All the political and financial drama might seem abstract without understanding the very real human cost behind it. In towns across America, like Dearborn, Michigan, Louisville, Kentucky, and Kansas City, Missouri, Ford factories had been anchors of economic stability. Families built entire lives around wages earned on those assembly lines. Generations worked side by side, passing down a sense of pride from father to son, mother to daughter. Now, everything felt uncertain. Workers talked among themselves about the rumor mill, which plant might be the first to close, whether voluntary buyouts were on the horizon, and how many jobs might be relocated. Some, nearing retirement, felt an urgent panic about whether their pensions would be secure. Younger employees worried about how they'd pay off mortgages, car loans, and student debt if pink slips were handed out. If the worst happened and entire operations moved overseas, communities would be left grappling with vacant buildings and hollowed-out job markets. Many employees were also grappling with anger and betrayal. They'd endured shift changes, mandatory overtime, and wage freezes in past downturns, all to keep Ford afloat. Some had attended company-sponsored training sessions for EV technology, believing they were part of the future of American innovation. Now it seemed that future might unfold on foreign soil. Local businesses also braced for potential disaster. Restaurants, coffee shops, hardware stores, so many enterprises rely on the paychecks of factory workers. If those wages disappear, ripple effects can devastate an entire region. City councils worried about the tax base shrinking, which would then impact public services like schools, libraries, and fire departments. Ford's leadership attempted to reassure communities, pointing to planned investments in certain U.S. facilities, but the specter of offshoring had shaken confidence too severely for soothing words to land effectively. Distrust kept growing, fanned by a crescendo of media reports. People wanted action, not promises. They wanted assurances that the jobs wouldn't vanish. And that's precisely what the United Auto Workers Union intended to secure through any means necessary, even if it meant orchestrating crippling strikes. The United Auto Workers is no stranger to confrontation, but this time it faced a singular threat: the possibility that the entire EV era might sidestep American soil. For decades, the union had negotiated for wage increases, job security, and robust benefits, underpinned by the assumption that U.S.-based assembly lines would remain central to automotive manufacturing. If electric vehicles, the future of the industry, were produced elsewhere, the union risked losing its leverage and watching its membership erode. When news of Ford's offshore shift broke, UAW leaders publicly declared it the ultimate violation of trust. They slammed executives for double-speaking in contract negotiations, where Ford had previously indicated a commitment to building EVs at home. Behind the scenes, union strategists began exploring coordinated strikes that would hit Ford where it hurt, specifically at the facilities developing and assembling battery packs and EV drivetrains. If the company was serious about going global, the UAW was determined to remind it that it still needed U.S. workers to keep the lights on for any domestic portion of its operations. It wasn't just the union's top brass taking action. Rank-and-file members flooded social media with messages of solidarity, urging each other to stand firm against potential layoffs. Some even posted pictures of canceled Ford vehicle orders, vowing not to purchase from a company they felt was abandoning them. Other industrial unions, like the Teamsters and various aerospace worker groups, signaled support, hinting that a broader labor alliance could emerge.
Much of the fury stemmed from a sense of betrayal. Many workers believed that electric vehicles were a second chance for American manufacturing, a way to rejuvenate old factories by replacing gas-powered assembly lines with state-of-the-art EV production. If Ford shipped that opportunity overseas, it would cripple not just one company's workforce, but a central pillar of the entire labor movement. Ford's PR statements tried to differentiate partial offshoring from a total exodus. But to the UAW, partial offshoring was bad enough. They argued that once the supply chain infrastructure and know-how were established abroad, it would only be a matter of time before more and more production quietly followed. In the union's view, this was an existential battle, and a feeble compromise would not suffice. In the midst of the public and union uproar, another major conflict simmered: Ford's evolving relationship with its dealership network. For more than 100 years, dealerships have been vital cogs in the Ford machine, acting as community outposts, service hubs, and the face of the brand to everyday buyers. Many dealerships are small family businesses passed down through generations, each investing heavily in showrooms, mechanics, and local marketing. Now, Ford's move toward direct-to-consumer EV sales threatens to upend that model. By centralizing inventory and offering fixed pricing online, mimicking Tesla's approach, Ford hopes to streamline operations and cut costs. But that leaves dealerships in a precarious spot, unsure of their future role or profitability. In states with strong franchise laws, dealer associations have launched lawsuits claiming Ford is breaching long-standing franchise agreements that guarantee dealers the right to sell Ford vehicles under certain conditions. Ford executives argue that the shift to EVs necessitates new methods of selling and servicing cars, citing the success of direct-to-consumer brands. But dealership owners see it as yet another betrayal. They poured money into specialized EV charging stations, upgraded service bays, and staff retraining, much of it at Ford's urging. Now, they worry that they'll become glorified test drive centers or lose out altogether if the buying process bypasses them entirely. The tension is palpable. In some regions, dealers have threatened to stop pushing Ford products as aggressively, even devoting more showroom space to competitors who still rely on the franchise model. This is no small threat, considering that local dealerships have deep roots in their communities. They sponsor youth sports teams, participate in civic events, and shape consumer perceptions in a direct, personal way. Combining this dealership strife with the union unrest and political backlash creates a trifecta of troubles for Ford. At every level, factory floors, showrooms, and the halls of Congress, the automaker finds itself squeezed between the demands of modernizing production for EVs and the fierce, often emotional expectations of the American public. And in this swirling cauldron of discontent, dark historical parallels start to loom. General Motors once boasted multiple brand lines that were household names: Pontiac, Saturn, Oldsmobile. Today, those names are relics, lost in the annals of corporate downsizing and economic shocks. Pontiac, famed for its muscle cars, and Saturn, heralded as a revolutionary approach to selling cars with no haggle pricing, both collapsed under the pressure of the 2008 economic crisis. They died not because the vehicles themselves were inherently flawed, but because GM needed to streamline operations to secure federal bailout funds and regain profitability. That lesson haunts Ford now. No matter how iconic a brand might be, if the public loses confidence and the numbers on the balance sheet turn red, even the most storied automotive names can vanish almost overnight. For Pontiac, loyalty and nostalgia weren't enough to keep the brand alive once GM decided it wasn't financially viable. For Saturn, a passionate community of buyers and employees discovered that corporate promises can vanish when priorities shift. Ford, of course, is not a sub-brand of a larger conglomerate. It's its own empire, arguably more stable than Pontiac or Saturn ever were. But stability has limits, especially in an era where EV technology demands massive upfront investments and global supply chains favor the lowest costs. If Ford's core consumer base rebels, if the unions strike, and if dealerships feel alienated, the brand's financial foundation could crack. And if those cracks deepen, even Ford might be forced to make drastic cuts that could resemble GM's brand culling in 2008. As market forces and political pressures mount, one overarching threat emerges: the idea that no brand is untouchable. The days when a company's heritage could shield it from the consequences of bad press, public anger, or financial miscalculations are long gone. If Ford fails to navigate this tightrope, it risks joining the unfortunate roster of American automotive tragedies. That bleak possibility raises an even more urgent question: how did we get here? For a time, it seemed like electric vehicles were the unstoppable wave of the future. Governments offered hefty subsidies, consumers lined up for shiny new EVs with sleek designs, and environmental advocates championed the shift away from fossil fuels. Automakers raced to stake claims in the EV market, each announcing ambitious targets for phasing out gas-powered engines. But the last couple of years introduced a grim dose of reality. Material costs for lithium, nickel, and cobalt soared. Supply chain bottlenecks meant battery pack production slowed or grew costlier. Meanwhile, rising inflation and interest rates made financing an EV feel like an added financial burden rather than a money saver. Dealerships across the U.S. reported unsold electric SUVs and trucks stacking up in storage lots. The supposed wave of EV demand looked more like a trickle. Why weren't they flying off the lots? For one, the charging infrastructure remained spotty, especially in rural and suburban areas. Range anxiety is no small thing when your daily commute might exceed the battery capacity, or you can't reliably find a fast charger near your work or home. Second, many consumers reevaluated their priorities when the economy started looking uncertain. Spending a premium on an EV became less appealing when gas prices stabilized, at least temporarily.
For automakers, the stakes of getting EV strategy right are enormous. Transition too slowly, and you risk obsolescence. Transition too quickly, and you burn cash on products that might not sell in adequate volume. Ford's choice to produce a chunk of its EV lineup overseas was undoubtedly about cost control. Cheaper labor, easier access to battery materials, less regulatory red tape. But that set off the cultural and political backlash we've been unpacking. In short, the EV market is no longer the straightforward success story it was made out to be in marketing campaigns. It's a minefield of supply issues, consumer hesitations, and fierce competition. And in this minefield, Ford is making a gamble that, while economically rational on paper, might become a public relations disaster of historic proportions. Even as Ford grapples with domestic turbulence, the rest of the world moves on. In Europe, strict emission standards, punitive taxes on big vehicles, and fierce competition from local champions like Volkswagen make life tough for American automakers. By design, Europe's regulations disadvantage large SUVs and trucks, precisely the segment where U.S. brands traditionally thrive. That's one reason Ford has downsized its European footprint, focusing on smaller models and some EV crossovers. In Asia, however, the story is more complex. Japan and South Korea have built robust automotive industries with strong government-industry collaboration. Toyota leaned heavily on hybrids, building a transitional bridge for consumers wary of pure EVs. Hyundai and Kia launched well-reviewed EVs, but simultaneously invested in U.S. plants, reaping both global scale and domestic goodwill. Their approach shows that it's possible to navigate globalization without alienating American labor, something Ford is struggling to achieve.
And then there's China. Already a behemoth in battery production, China is aggressively expanding its EV manufacturing footprint. Companies like BYD and NIO are not only serving the massive Chinese market, but also eyeing Western consumers. With strategic moves such as establishing plants in Mexico, thus capitalizing on the USMCA trade agreement, Chinese automakers can sidestep many of the tariffs that would otherwise apply to direct imports from China. This effectively means cheaper EVs can flow into the U.S., challenging Ford and other domestic producers right in their home market. As global competitors weave around regulatory barriers and exploit trade loopholes, Ford's margin for error shrinks. Offshoring might help it keep up in the short term, but the bigger question remains, how long can Ford, and by extension the entire American auto industry, hold on to its leadership in a world that's rapidly rethinking manufacturing priorities? To truly grasp Ford's rationale for shifting production overseas, you have to understand the importance of batteries in the EV equation. The battery can account for up to 40% of the total cost of an electric vehicle. Securing a stable and affordable supply of batteries is crucial, and right now the most advanced battery technologies, along with the cheapest production methods, are predominantly based in Asia, especially China, South Korea, and Japan. Ford can try to build its own battery plants in the United States, but that involves navigating expensive real estate, stringent environmental regulations, and an underdeveloped domestic supply chain for critical minerals. By contrast, Asia offers streamlined permitting, more robust infrastructure, and closer proximity to raw materials. Add to that the allure of foreign governments rolling out lucrative subsidies and tax incentives, and it's clear why Ford would find an overseas path enticing. Yet this choice exposes Ford to another form of vulnerability: geopolitical tensions. If relations sour with China, or if tariffs skyrocket, Ford's supply chain could be disrupted. Already, lawmakers in Washington are wary of how reliant the U.S. could become on foreign battery producers. Some see this as a national security risk, arguing that America should not hand over strategic control of emerging technologies to rival nations. From Ford's perspective, the overriding imperative is to survive the turbulent EV transformation. If that means shaking hands with foreign battery providers to keep manufacturing costs low, so be it. But in doing so, it appears to have stepped on a landmine of American pride, labor interests, and political ambition. As everyone from Trump to the UAW lines up to decry the move, Ford may discover that short-term economic benefits can bring long-term headaches. After exploring the many facets of Ford's bombshell decision, we're left with a fundamental question. Is this the inevitable future of the auto industry, or is it a stark warning sign of American manufacturing's decline? On one hand, Ford's move can be seen as a purely strategic calculation. Faced with a shaky EV market, surging battery costs, and fierce global competition, it chose to go where production is cheapest and resources most plentiful. In a capitalist framework, that might be the rational path. On the other hand, the emotional outcry from workers, unions, politicians, and consumers indicates that there's more at stake than just dollars and cents. The American public still believes, at least partially, that companies birthed on U.S. soil owe something to the people who built them. Whether you applaud Ford's pragmatism or condemn its choices, the stakes couldn't be higher. Keep watching this space, because the next few months could define not just the future of Ford Motor Company, but the future of American manufacturing itself.